Hmm. Okay. Okay, we are live.
I'm good.
You're good.
Cool. Hi everyone. First, really excited to be zooming into y'all at the cafe and to all the people watching live. I really love the project going on in Glasgow. I think it's really exciting. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm coming to y'all from South Atlanta. I'm about 5 minutes away from the Weelani Forest, which is the epicenter of the movement to defend the Atlanta forest and stop Cop City that possibly some of you have or haven't heard of. So if you haven't, I'm going to start with a little bit of context about what this movement is and what's going on here in Atlanta and why it's so important. So this movement is about over 2 years old. Um, as far as current incarnation, but effectively it's older than that. They've been planning these two projects in this forest in South Atlanta for a long time. And effectively, there's two projects that they want to bulldoze this forest in South Atlanta for. One is the one most people have probably heard of, which is Cop City. That is a militarized police training center, mock city, etc. Um, to with this emerged out of the response of the 2020 George Floyd protests in America. The city found themselves very unprepared and off guard and defeated, and morally defeated by that, by the mass participation of proletarians throughout the city of Atlanta and other parts of Georgia. They don't really want to experience a repeat of that again. So they decided they were going to plan this facility. They're calling it obviously a training facility under the guise of police, fire, EMS safety, things like that. But effectively, what they want to do is practice crowd control techniques to handle mass protests in the future, any other kind of popular uprisings, etc. And then the other side is the side we call Hollywood dystopia. This is being ran by a man named Ryan Millsap. He is originally of it's Black Hall Studios, but they changed their name to Shadowbox Studios when this kind of got popular. They want to create the largest soundstage complex in the English speaking world. And this is obviously an issue for people here. One, outside of the environmental destruction that will continue to impose, this is an ongoing trend of gentrification through a growing film industry in Atlanta. This film industry kind of started to take a hold here 10 or 15 years ago, but it's rapidly growing. Lots of studios, including Department of Defense funded like Marvel movies are being made here, and all these kinds of things that are drastically altering and changing the landscape of Atlanta, the culture of Atlanta, um, definitely for the worse. Culturally, where this and geographically where this forest is situated is South Atlanta and South DeKalb County, which is the county that borders Atlanta. This is like a historically very working class, very black area of the city. Unlike the north side, who is pushing for these projects, which is much whiter, much wealthier, very oppositional to the south side of the city. So they want to put it, and this is a residential area too. The forest itself is also deemed by the city one of the four essential lungs of Atlanta. Part of what makes Atlanta a nice place to live currently is that we have the largest tree canopy of any major metropolitan city. So it gives us climate resiliency, things like that. The root system holds back a lot of flooding that this area already kind of experiences, but prevents it from making it a lot worse. So this is this environmentally crucial portion of forest, and these two projects, which border each other both in this area, basically are representing all of the things people fought against in 2020: police brutality, gentrification, environmental destruction, all of the most seemingly pressing issues of the time. And of course, in this kind of working class Black area, um, which they have had no problem destroying parts like this in before throughout the city for like new highways and things like that. So the movement started to take shape in its current form about 2 years ago, mostly through a pretty consistent occupation of the forest. This is the image on the screen is from that truck that somehow got abandoned there, and some forest defenders in block. Um, these forest occupations were kind of crucial in one establishing the creative nature of the movement, like a forest occupation in what is actually an urban environment. Just outside of this forest is gas stations and neighborhoods and things like that. We're not in the middle of nowhere. You could leave the forest and go to Walmart if you needed something, if you wanted to. So it's this kind of weird forest urban environment that so people establish these occupations in tree houses, barricades, things like that. And this allows really early on in the movement people to just kind of very inspiringly and militantly just constantly repel police incursions, construction incursions, um, any kind of possible forward movement by the adversaries of the movement, the police, and the film studios. It's also worth saying, I did forget this, the police project is being backed not even by the police department, but by a police foundation called the Atlanta Police Foundation. I don't know if they have these in other parts of the world, but in America, they are basically nonprofit fundraising entities for the police departments. So already they receive the majority, like over 60% of the budget from most cities, but apparently that's not enough money for them. They need more money for some reason. So they have these nonprofit arms that constantly fundraise money for them to have more tanks and crazy weapons and things to hurt people with. So that's what the Atlanta Police Foundation is, and they're spearheading the Cop City project. So the occupations were really fundamental for a long time, until they were eventually fully removed, displaced, and extremely recently they closed the public park, which is where this forest is situated, is on a public park. People can legally enter and exist and do whatever they want. And that kind of ended that phase of the movement, but opened up a way for a new forms of mass movement in the streets, and the kind of, for some people in the more political realm, in like City Hall and things like that. For example, there was city council meeting just recently. Over 500 people went to it, gave public comments about the project. 100% of those public comments were against the project. The city, which had been going on and on and on about how there were so many people in favor of it, couldn't even find a single person who would come to their city council meeting and speak in favor of the project. Despite that, the city still made a motion to offer up what we believed at the time was $30 million more for the project. And now, through investigative journalism by the Atlanta Community Press Collective, it's actually been revealed that it's $60 million. So the city has actually been blatantly lying to the people, even about what was already way too much money. It's double that. So this is kind of where we're kind of situated now. The Black Hall Project, the film side is frozen. They're in legal battles. The Ryan Millsap is honestly being sued by his own company, for I don't really understand why, and they're kind of frozen, and that's good but not something we should ever forget, that they still want to do it. It hasn't been canceled yet. But the most active threat, of course, and the one most people have heard about and are talking about, is Cop City, where they've clear cut most of what they want to clear cut. And it's important that we don't consider that defeat. These trees can be replanted, and even if the project is somehow built, that is also not defeat. Buildings can be taken down, and trees can again be replanted in intelligent ways that grow and take root. So, but they're currently clear cut most of what they want to clear cut. They're attempting to start construction, but they've actively facilitated this intense collapse of a true liberal democratic structure that is what is making this movement become so popular in the city. So they've kicked out inspectors from the project, so they can't actually see when they're not meeting the ecological requirements, like erosion control and the silt that gets into the riverways that goes through this forest that provides drinking water for people and for the ecosystem. And then, of course, they during the last city council meeting, they reserved about a third of the seats for police foundation members. Um, Again, overwhelmingly, people have spoken against this project and have said they don't want it, but the city council just denies the desires of their constituents. This is kind of like this normal blockage of what anarchists kind of understand is always the case. The city governments are never going to come through for us, but now is kind of opening to the imagination of like other parts of the left and the liberal establishment of this city that, okay, we are actually in this kind of crisis of democracy. Our elected officials do not care what we have to say. They are not listening to us. That is not going to stop us from fighting against this project and preventing it from happening, however that may be. So that's where the project's at right now. And then I also want to, and what I want to get into though, a little more so, is this kind of funny part of the movement, which is this Jewish aspect of the movement, which is very confusing for a lot of people. Atlanta is not known as kind of a Jewish city, or even with like, it's not thought of as the way cities like New York City are in America, or other places of the world with like larger institutional Jewish lefts, or just some Jewish leftist scenes in general, Jewish anarchist groups. But that is what's so funny is in this movement, there's been this large mass participation of Jews, not necessarily anarchists, not necessarily leftists, but united by various different things: abolitionism, anti-Zionism, anti-capitalism, even like more liberal aspects of Judaism, including rabbis from the Reconstructionist movement, like coming to the forest and talking about it, giving statements, talking to their congregants about it, hosting services and things like that. And it's kind of interesting the way that this emerged. This is what's so interesting to me, and what's so shocking is like the way that the wealthy and elite parts of the city are congregated in the north, so is also kind of coincidentally the main Jewish, like the kind of centralized Jewish community of Atlanta that does exist, is small, is also in the north part of the city, in the north parts of the bordering county, DeKalb County. Originally were also in the south part of the city, specifically a neighborhood called Peoplestown. Was very heavily Jewish for a long time, until the same kind of highway infrastructure projects that pushed out a lot of Black communities had the same effect on these kind of poor Jewish communities, and they effectively got erased from the history of the city. But for a long time now, there's kind of been this growing, expanding, politically minded Jewish community on the south side that the Jewish establishment in the city has ignored because it's more radical. It's more oftenly anti-Zionist, things that the institutional parts of the Jewish community in Atlanta don't want to talk about, primarily because the institutional part of the Jewish institutional part of Atlanta is so wrapped up in Zionism. Acknowledging something like a working class anti-Zionist Jewish community would honestly be devastating for them. One of their key projects, which is also integral to the Cop City project, is something we have in Georgia called GILI. This is the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program, founded by, I'm blanking on the guy's name, this Jewish man, very Zionist, to create through one of the colleges, Georgia State University, to create cross-training between Atlanta police and Israeli police initially. Now it's expanded to many other countries, including China, Kazakhstan. Many other countries across the world have used GILI as a law enforcement exchange program. So effectively what that means is police from Georgia go to Israel, and they see the brutal methods of policing to maintain apartheid and racism there. And they bring that back to Atlanta. And in the same time, police from Israel come to Georgia, which has the largest incarceration rate of any state in the U.S. About 3% of our population is incarcerated. Um, they take that police and they bring it back to Israel to inflict upon Palestinians and dissidents and other Arab people. And so the institutional Jewish community has this horrible stake in the project. And now that this kind of uprising of or growing number of anti-Zionist Jews, including some aspects of the Jewish, of like fringer parts of the Jewish institution, including local congregations pseudo supporting it, their rabbi hosting Shabbat in the forest. This is kind of freaking them out, even leading the Gilly founder to in a secret email that was sent to me to say that we are despicable Jews, which is pretty great. I really liked that. Um, but the way this started is kind of interesting. It goes back to before the project began, before this project was even known about, before COVID. Many of the Jewish people in this part of the city kind of realizing, oh, there is like a lot of Jewish people who we have shared identity, or shared feelings with, shared politics with, living in this area of the city, and we're completely ignored. We're all completely alienated by the shuls we went to or the communities we grew up in. If you are lucky enough to like grow up in a Jewish community in the American South, there's so few of them. Where I originally grew up, just outside of Atlanta, there was none outside of my family, and that's kind of the feeling of all these young Jewish people here on the South Side. Is like, okay, we've probably all been almost wasting our time for years trying to get our communities, our quote unquote communities, to like come to the light or do something or, be better, and just constantly failing and feeling bad about it. And it's like, let's not do that anymore. Let's form our own thing and just put that kind of legitimacy in ourselves. We don't need these other groups to really care or respect about us that much. They will continue to ignore us as long as we let them. So started congregating kind of fairly regularly in 2019, having these Shabbat dinners. Started with like 10 people, quickly growing to like 15, 20, 30, 40 people. And it was really amazing. It's something I'd never really seen before, is like, okay, we all knew, we believed these things, and we knew definitely someone else did, but we didn't know so many other people did. Um, but they did, and they were out there, and we were able to like find each other and connect and build this kind of groundwork of a radical Jewish community in the city of Atlanta. And then when the movement started, when the projects started, it was kind of clear that maybe we would have some kind of role in it. And mostly that took place during the Weeks of Action. And so the Weeks of Action have been one of the primary drivers of the movement. Usually there's very little, and I will say not usually, but most of the time, some of the time, when there's very little actual political movement going on around the forest outside of when there was the occupation, that was consistent and ongoing. But outside of that, very little political movement until these Weeks of Actions started. So when the first Week of Action started, we said we should do something. We should contribute to this movement in a collective way, bring our whatever to it. Wanted to know what we can do. Well, we are really good at hosting dinner. Let's just host dinner just in the forest. Return to the wild as we may. And so we did. And there was about 10 people, maybe 15 people came to this initial one. It was very sweet. It was very beautiful. The movement was also looking very differently because construction had not nearly started. So things didn't feel so real yet. Things felt very, very surreal. We're just here gathering in this place and building this connection to it. And, we all loved it before because it's like our home. This city in the forest is our home. And this like beautiful place where you can kind of get away from the, even though it's only 5-10 minutes away, getting away from the loudness and the drive and the hustle and the fastness of the city to like, okay, it's Shabbat. We can slow down. We can be in nature, and we can be with each other, and like we can create this connection to this land that we desire to protect, and we will protect. And so that happened, and then there's been several more Weeks of Actions, and we decided every Week of Action there has been a Shabbat, and they have grown substantially. There's about to be the week of action, um, six, I think, 5 or 6. I'm kind of blanking on which one. But the last week of action was when a local rabbi um, decided he would host his own. He would host a Shabbat service in the forest, which had never happened before. And he asked, "How do you do that?" And of course, we say, "Well, you just do it. You don't. This movement is extremely decentralized. It does not have a central leadership. It doesn't have an organizing body. It only has people who decide to step up and do things." And he goes, "Great, I can do that." Um, and he does, and he goes, and there's over 100 people at this Shabbat service in the forest. Um, and everyone is praying, and like, this to me is like kind of uh, this really ultimate realization of like a religious Judaism. To me, it's like we are not bounded by walls right now. We're not bounded by a liberal ideology. We're not bounded by any kind of idea of what Judaism has to be. We are like in this. We are in like a war zone, a beautiful place, but is a war zone effectively. Um, and we are protecting it, and we are like in asserting a spiritual dominance in a way of it, or maybe not dominance, but a spiritual connection, a spiritual protection of this place. And of course, there's been many other things. There's as holidays have come, Sukkot has been celebrated. There was a sukkah that was built in the forest, and Sukkot was celebrated there. And there was a weekend-long High Holy Day celebration, and there was a Purim party, and many other celebrations of Jewish joy throughout this movement. And watching it kind of grow and expand has been ever changing, because what we are facing is truly a collapse of the normality of the Atlanta way. And so I will talk about what the Atlanta way is also now. The Atlanta way is an ideological platform that the city of Atlanta has built itself on. Um, Atlanta has all this kind of civil rights history and cultural history, but it doesn't have it's not thought of as the way people think of other cities that have been homes of radicalism and revolutionaries and things like that. And the reason is because they very intentionally built this program called the Atlanta Way. The Atlanta Way is essentially once kind of the old guard white elite realized that the city's black population was growing and kind of taking hold and doing well. And this was becoming a black city, but not just like a working class black city. This was like becoming a city of black wealth, and like a city of black intelligence and academia, and things like that. And they knew very quickly on that this is something they would have to deal with in order to maintain the status quo. So they basically created a way to co-opt Black leaders and Black institutions like the Atlanta University Center, which is the 4 historically Black college universities in Atlanta, into a program to maintain status quo. So one of the best examples of this is during the funeral of Martin Luther King, where there are riots all over the country. They know they could probably be riots here. How do we avoid that? We will just deputize Black student movement leaders as kind of guards of the protest or whatever, and they will maintain the order. And that's exactly what happens. They maintain the order. And so they've continued this process forever. You see this today through people like Killer Mike, who presents himself as like a radical revolutionary rapper, but actually like is fully embedded with the city. Denounced the George Floyd protests, said it made him cry to see his city being destroyed. This is what the Atlanta Way is. This is how the institution takes advantage of the existing Black upper class in the city to crush working class, and specifically Black working class rage that would otherwise exist. And so and of course they're trying that again here. The city has brought in groups like the Concerned Black Clergy and Black trade unionists. When other unions have spoken up against, they're going to use the institutional ones to denounce the programs, denounce the protests and things like that, to kind of explain look, we don't need, how will we ever grow as a city and recover if we don't have these things for our police? Or how will we create new jobs if we don't create these film studios, all the while kind of crushing over, um, a black neighborhood literally, and bringing more police into a black neighborhood and things like that. I was definitely going somewhere with it, but I lost my train of thought, unfortunately. Um, oh, but as this right, as this crisis is, it's this facade for them is failing as this crisis of democracy is expanding. So, like I said earlier, with the city council just completely ignoring people, with the fact that over 40 protesters are being charged with domestic terrorism, that a queer Afro-Indigenous protester, Tortiguita, who's also had a ancestor who's in the Holocaust, was assassinated by a firing wall inside the forest. And then they tried to frame them as someone who shot the police first. And this was disproven through two autopsies, the city autopsy and a privately done autopsy by the family. Um, Fully disproved that that Tortuguita had shot these officers, that they were just blatantly executed, and the police tried to cover it up as they always do. So that's kind of the crisis that has to be managed here by the city, and increasingly they are becoming desperate. They know that they are losing this kind of the they're losing the discourse. The discourse has been, controlled by the movement since it began, because the city didn't take the movement seriously at the beginning. They probably assumed it would be some fringe environmentalist hippies. And of course, they tried to frame the movement as this kind of, these are a bunch of um, white environmentalists who don't understand Black Atlanta. And this has very amazingly been counteracted by other parts of the Black left who have decided to split themselves from institutional Black left and say, no, that is not what this movement is. This movement, one, yeah, there's white people involved, anarchists involved, but like there's there's fucking Black people here too. And we care about this, and we do not want you to build the city here, and you cannot continue to ignore us in this, because you're, to them as well, you are just a fringe person. Who are you? So they have no control over this narrative. Today, actually, they decided they would be in their best interest to have a media tour. They invited several media agencies to come and see the project and look, this is where the park will be, and the public park that would be open to everyone. And Michael, who wants to go to a public park that's surrounded by firing centers for police? I don't know who would want to go to that. It's like a horrible park to me when there's a perfectly good forest there right now. But of course, they intentionally didn't invite organizations that have been critical of their project, including local NPR stations and other journalist institutions across the city that have been beloved by the city, but are now being kind of dismissed because they are not falling in line with the city, including the local NPR station and things like that. So moving forward now, it's like, what do we expect to happen? What do we see happening? The city council still has to vote whether or not they're going to allocate the quote unquote 30, but actually $60 million to the project. It seems like likely they will, despite a lot of public outcry and public backlash to the city. Of course, there's another week of action coming up, and information can be found about that on, like, if you just defend the Atlanta forest, social medias and things like that. It should be clear, like, if you can come to Atlanta, you should come to Atlanta. They want to, like, a lot of the domestic terrorism arrests have been from out of state. They've done that intentionally. They've actually released people who were local so they could arrest out of state people, so they could say this movement's being secretly run by outside agitators, which maybe is, for some of us, might sound like a dog whistle. But the outside agitators don't matter to us in Atlanta because this project is like an environmental, is not just an environmental to us locally, but to the world. Like the world is facing kind of an impending environmental collapse. So everyone has a stake in this, in all forest land being protected, and in all ecological land being protected against unnecessary development. And of course, projects like Cop City, if are successful and completed, will be replicated in other parts of America and presumably other parts of the world. These are things that people everywhere have stake in. And we reject this idea to the city that there's anything called outside agitators. We are all from planet Earth. We all have stake in planet Earth. No one can be an outside agitator on planet Earth. We all care about this. So if that's ever a question, should I come to Atlanta for the week of action? Yes, you should come for the week of action. Or whenever, just to come see what's going on. Currently, the park itself was closed by executive order to stop people from going in, because that's where a lot of people were gathering and creating and forming and thinking and existing and living and partying and things like that. Because also what confuses the city is the city is confused by joy. As Jews, we are not confused by joy. We understand joy very deeply and intensely and spiritually. And as anarchists, we understand joy deeply, intentionally, and spiritually. This is like a fundamental principle of both these things to me personally. Is like not just being like, we're fucked and we shouldn't do anything, and to be like, no, there is still beauty here and we can resist in this kind of beautiful way. And so what confuses the city is how many ways people have resisted, and the fact that they've never been in tension with each other, which is historically seems to be the case. In my experience, more militant tactics and more PC tactics, or more electoral tactics, versus like artistic flavored tactics, intend to be intentional with each other historically. To me, people say, why do you do that when you could have done this? And that is not at all the case in this movement. They've all been symbiotic with each other. My like kind of go-to like metaphor is like the movement itself kind of represents it resembles the forest. Like the movement is functions as an ecosystem with all of these different parts that work in conjunction to create one thing, and so they're never in tension with or against each other. So like, just for example, like you can see in the photo, you have these forest occupations which have been very militant and extremely brave and inspiring, and then you, at the same time this is going on, people from like the socialists or whatever are like, we're going to canvass the neighborhood and talk to the neighbors and make sure they know what's going on, and that's very fine. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do that. And if you don't want to be in the forest, you don't have to be in the forest. And other people are like, well, we're gonna, you can see, probably, if you may have seen footage from after Tortuguita is murdered, the city called it a riot through downtown Atlanta, where police cars were set on fire, and like windows at the police foundation and some banks are smashed. And normally, the left would say, that's destroying the movement, and that did not happen this time. They were like, no, this is their expression of rage, and this does not go against like the movement at all. And at the same time, but people are going, okay, we will host dance parties in the forest, and we will host punk music festivals in the forest, or like, the Jews are saying we will host spiritual events in the forest. And all of these things have kind of worked in conjunction and allowed the movement to spread so broadly and exist in such a complex way that the city does not know how to combat this. They only understand kind of a certain type of militancy, and they only understand like a certain type of politic that this movement has completely broken away from. And hopefully, like, has, even being here, I'm constantly inspired by the types of things people are doing and what is going on. And that is why I believe that the city will definitely lose in the long run, is they are so confused. They do not know how to combat joy. They do not know how to combat like spiritualism. They do not know how to combat love. They only know death and destruction and hatred. um, and and people who operate on this kind of axis, they cannot succeed. They will turn on each other the way right wingers do when they are like arrested, and then they all snitch on each other. And people who have been arrested in this movement are not snitching or saying anything, and this confuses the state. They don't know what to do. So I don't know what the long run will be. I know that the movement continues to grow and kind of experience new ways of being, and I know that we're going to continue entering into new ways of being. Um, I hope that I hope it continues. um, I think that, what we have learned kind of from how we've learned what works and what doesn't work. We're coming into this next week of action, and um, we know that the city kind of gets scared. They get scared about these kinds of things. They really put their eyes on it. The last week of action was when the music festival happened, when uh, 23 people were arrested at this music festival after a direct action occurred about a few miles away from the music festival. The city, of course, said we're going to collectively punish everyone else who's nearby, and make them responsible for this extremely brave militant direct action that helped push the project back more. It's also worth saying this project is supposed to be a lot farther along. They're extremely behind. They were supposed to have started last year and be much farther ahead by now. Every time their timeline gets pushed back, they release a new timeline to make it seem like they're on time. They continue to release like new kind of fake information, but that's not the case. They're extremely behind on their project, and it's becoming increasingly expensive for them. And probably a lot of their private funding for the police foundation is contingent on this public funding. People here don't want to spend $60 million on a police training center. They don't want a city that doesn't have public transportation, that doesn't have a robust public transportation system, and that is closing hospitals, and that has like all of the roads are full of potholes. And that's the situation Atlanta is in. We don't want this. Clearly, we don't want this. But the city is so. It almost seems silly that you think they would have learned some kind of lesson from 2020 about giving in to what people want, or what you do when you don't do what people want. They don't seem to have learned this lesson at all. But they continue to push forward and try. But there will be this next week of action coming up. I believe that it will be as with all the other ones, a great kind of forceful, exemplary, inspiring gathering of imagination and force. I am excited to see what the Jews here continue to do. I know there's probably things that have happened that I don't even know about. There's been a few articles about it by local Jewish journalists has talked about it as well. Oddly enough, was picked up by the Times of Israel. So maybe that's because they care so much about the Gilly program. I don't know. I know that the rabbi who participated in the movement received threats from institutional parts of the Jewish community. So I know something is working. And it seems now more than ever that we have crossed over into being like a true mass movement. When we see 500 people in City Hall, spending hours and hours and hours, like just screaming and making public comments and demanding this of the city. I know that the future of this movement is very bright. Of course, we don't always know what's going to happen, but I'm excited. I hope people wherever you are watching this from, or if you're in Glasgow, a lot of the companies that are involved, um, they have offices all over the world. And if you want to support this movement, you don't have to wait for permission or for marching orders that aren't really going to come. If there's um, a a bank or a Home Depot, and it can be you and three friends with a banner and a megaphone saying, "Hey, you need to drop this," or you are obviously all you can follow your imaginations. Um, but there's ways to participate in this movement from all across the world. Um, a lot of these projects can be found on the website Sorry Campaign. Sorry originally stood for Stop Reeves Young. That was the original general contractor for the project. They dropped out very quickly after many of their job sites were sabotaged, and their office was visited several times in protest. The current general contractor is uh, a southeastern U.S. based company, Brassfield and Gorey, based out of Birmingham, Alabama. They also have offices all across, several across the southeast, including Atlanta and Nashville. And some of these companies, though, do projects all across the world. I believe Atlas Technical Consultants does things all across the world. I assume I don't know if Home Depot is all around the world or just in America, but there seems to be ways to participate everywhere. Um, yeah, are there any questions? I've moved into rambling territory. All right. Well, I don't see any. I just want to remind everyone again, the week of action is coming up. Let me pull up those dates here. It's going to be from the week of where is it? The week of June 24th, July 1st of 2023. It's week of action 6. So people are really encouraged to come to Atlanta. And if you're just following, just really trying to follow the movement, right now the thing to look at is the city council vote. That's kind of the next kind of crucial point for the movement. Whatever happens there will kind of affect either an increase in militancy or increase in rage, things like that. What I would historically, what I'm led to believe, don't actually know, but what I would assume historically. And then, of course, if you want to host solidarity things in your town, they're really welcome. The Atlanta Solidarity Fund does all of the work for supporting the arrestees, paying bail and legal fees. So if you ever want to do a fundraiser, doing a fundraiser for the Atlanta Solidarity Fund is always extremely and deeply appreciated. There are still people in jail facing domestic terrorism charges, bogus charges. Currently, the state is actually considering revoking some people's bond on the grounds of refusing to cooperate, which legal teams are already prepared to combat this because it's completely unreasonable and unconstitutional. And if any of these companies are in whatever town or country you live in and you want to do some kind of banner there, whatever it is you want to do, you should do that. And it will be extremely welcomed. And I think it always inspires people in Atlanta when they see people in other parts of the world um, participating in this movement because it's not just for Atlanta; it just happens to be in Atlanta. And I think that's all I got.